Hello, and welcome to the Mirrored Muse podcast, a sanctuary for the soul and a spark for the revolutionary spirit, where our truth is reflected, our radiance remembered, and our spirit set free. I'm your host, Whitney Amber, and together we'll journey into the depths of what it means to awaken, embody, and expand as the muse of our own life. Through soulful storytelling, raw reflections, guided practices, and revolutionary conversations, this podcast is here to truly meet you in your own becoming. So, let's take a deep breath, soften our edges. It's time to step into the mirror. This is your invitation to rise. Hi, my loves. Welcome back to the Mirrored Muse. Before we dive in today, I have got to admit, this episode, feels like such a long time coming and just like the biggest full body exhale. Not because it's comfortable and definitely not because it's a popular or trendy topic, but because this is truly a core practice and core value of my own life. And it's infused into literally everything I am and that I experience. So it just feels so true and liberating to be discussing this with you today. So thank you so much for being here. You know, I've actually known for quite a while now that this is the conversation that I'm meant to open next and a core lane for the Mirrored Muse. And if I'm being honest, I've also felt my throat tighten every time I got close to it. That familiar pause, a freeze moment, and that quiet fear of being misunderstood. And still, every time I let myself even think about naming sensuality out loud, something in me softened, relaxed, as if something was reclaimed and or came home. So if you're listening and, maybe feeling that same exhale or maybe a little nervous energy, hello, you're not alone. This isn't a topic we ease into casually. It's one that certainly calls out to us, one we arrive at when we're ready to stop abandoning ourselves, So before we begin, I want to invite you to just take one slow breath with me. Just enough to let your shoulders soften and so that you can return to your body. Because today's conversation isn't meant to be rushed. Today, I want to talk about sensuality. And I want to name this clearly right from the start. I am not talking about seduction. I'm not talking about sexuality for performance. And I'm definitely not talking about being desirable for someone else. I'm talking about sensuality in its original sense. Eros as life force. Aliveness, creative current. The feeling of being inhabited at home in your body, completely inside yourself. And the reason this matters is because sensuality changes everything. It changes our relationships, our leadership, our creativity, our capacity to receive, and our sense of self-trust. And yet most of us were taught very early on to avoid it. For many women, sensuality was never modeled as something nourishing and safe. It was something to suppress or joke about, cringe away from, or only acknowledge in extremes. It was introduced a little sideways through discomfort, silence, or like a set of assumed rules that were just never fully explained, but somehow deeply enforced, For some of us, sensuality was treated as something dangerous, embarrassing, shameful. For others, maybe something only allowed in very specific contexts, such as behind closed doors, within marriage, or only if it looked a certain way. And for many women, it wasn't discussed at all, just completely avoided altogether. and you could feel it in the room. The way adults shifted when intimacy appeared on screen, the way affection was minimized or quickly redirected, the way curiosity was shut down before it could form language. So we learned early on a narrative that sounds a lot like, this part of me makes people uncomfortable, so hide it away and cover up. And when something consistently makes the world uncomfortable, the body totally adapts. In this context, it creates disconnection. We learned how to stay composed, how to stay appropriate, tasteful, palatable, not provoking desire of our own, let alone from someone else. Basically, we learned how to live from the neck up. Now, this is where avoidance became intelligence, because avoidance was protection, avoidance was self-preservation. Avoidance was the nervous system saying, this doesn't feel safe to explore openly. So instead of inhabiting our bodies, we learned to fight with them or manage them. We managed tone, we managed posture, we managed expression, we managed how much pleasure was too much. We managed how much softness was acceptable. And slowly, subtly, somehow, sensuality became something external, something to turn off or on, something to perform or suppress, something completely separate from who we actually are. And here's the part that often goes unnoticed and unnamed, which is when sensuality leaves, tension fills the gap. So just think about that statement for a second and just feel in your body what that even means or how that lands. When sensuality leaves, tension fills the gap. Without sensuality, rest starts to feel unproductive, stillness feels uncomfortable, pleasure feels earned, not inherent. We move faster than our bodies want to. We speak before we've landed or grounded in our very own center. We overfunction because presence and actually being with ourselves feels unfamiliar. It's like we don't know what to do. This is where hustle sneaks in. This is where performance sneaks in. This is where even healing becomes something we do instead of something we feel. And many women don't realize this is even happening. They just know that they feel tired, disconnected, out of sync with their cycle, oddly numb, or just missing the aliveness, the juiciness they desire. Another piece of this avoidance is how sensuality was collapsed into sexuality. Please hear me right now when I say these two are not the same thing. They can certainly influence each other, but they are not the same. Now, when sensuality is only ever discussed through a sexual lens, it loses its neutrality. It becomes charged, policed, moralized. But sensuality in its original sense was never about sex alone. It was about aliveness, the ability to feel warmth, pleasure, resonance, intuition, and timing. And y'all know I say on here all the time that the future is feeling. And when we remove that capacity, we don't become more pure or disciplined. We become disembodied. And a disembodied woman is far easier to control by productivity culture, by unrealistic expectations, and roles that require constant output without replenishment. So let me just take a second and offer a reframe that might feel like an exhale to you as well. Sensuality is not about being seen. It's about being felt by yourself. It's about becoming the muse of your own life. Sensuality is the pace you move at, the way you breathe, how deeply you listen to your body's yes and no, how safe you feel slowing down. This is where I want to slow us down as well, because sensuality doesn't need to be rebranded or made anything other than exactly what it is. Sensuality at its root comes from sensation. Again, it's just the ability to feel, to register and respond to life from inside the body. Before it was sexualized, moralized, or aestheticized, sensuality was simply aliveness. Yes, you heard that correctly. It's the body saying, I'm fully here. Sensuality is the difference between rushing through a moment and inhabiting it, between doing something well and feeling yourself while doing it. Sensuality lives in pacing, in breath, in the subtle intelligence of knowing when to pause and when to move. It's literally bringing to life our senses. And this is where I want to be very clear. Sensuality is not performance, it is presence. Performance asks, how am I coming across? Whereas presence asks, am I here? And if I'm here, am I fully here? And the body always knows the difference. One of the biggest misconceptions about sensuality is that it's obnoxious, that it announces itself, that it needs to be expressive, dramatic, or visually obvious. But true sensuality is often quiet. It's the woman who doesn't rush to feel silence, the one who lets a breath complete before she speaks, the one whose movements are economical, not because she's restrained, just because she's inhabited. Sensuality does not chase attention at all. It literally regulates the room. And this is why it reads as power. And another important distinction here, seduction reaches outward. Sensuality moves inward. So it's seduction that is oriented towards response. Sensuality is oriented toward attunement. Seduction says, do you want me? And sensuality says, hey, I am with myself. And paradoxically, that inward orientation is what makes someone magnetic, because there's no grasping for attention, no proving, no urgency at all, just coherence. When sensuality is reclaimed as presence, it changes how we relate to everything. Time slows down, not because we have more of it, just because we're no longer at war with it. Creativity becomes less forced because ideas don't need to be extracted, they just arrive. Decision-making becomes embodied. You don't just think your way forward. You feel when something is aligned or off. Even rest changes because rest stops being something you earn and starts being something your body expects. This is also where sensuality becomes deeply connected to sovereignty. A woman who can feel her body clearly knows when something is a yes, knows when something is a no, and does not need to justify either. She doesn't override herself to keep the peace. She doesn't abandon her rhythm to meet someone else's pace either. She just leads herself first. And that is the foundation of every other form of leadership. There's also something important to say about safety here as well. For many women, sensuality disappeared because the body learned it wasn't safe to feel too much. So reclaiming sensuality is not about pushing sensation. It's about rebuilding trust. Trust that you can slow down. Trust that you can feel pleasure without consequence. Trust that you can stay with sensation without losing control. This is why sensuality is inherently regulating. It brings us out of hypervigilance and back into relationship with ourselves. And when we talk about eros, not as eroticism, but as life force, this is what we mean. Eros is the current that animates creativity. It's the spark behind inspiration, the very thing that makes life feel worth participating in. When Eros flows, leadership becomes humane. Relationships soften and make surrender not only possible, but powerful. Creativity feels alive again. But when it's blocked, everything becomes full of effort and work, feels transactional and just dry. So reclaiming sensuality isn't indulgent, it's essential. This is why sensuality literally changes everything, not because it makes life more aesthetically pleasing either, but because it makes life felt. And in the next episodes of this series, we are going to be continuing to unpack what this looks like in real life. We're going to be talking about sensuality as presence, sensuality as sovereignty, sensuality as creative intelligence, sensuality as relational repair, and sensuality as leadership, not as ideas, but as lived, truly embodied ways of being in the world. Because when a woman is at home in her body, she doesn't need attention or anything outside of herself to be powerful. She simply is, and her presence alone does the talking. Sensuality touches every area of life, and this is why it isn't a niche topic. It literally governs how we create, how we lead, how we love, how we receive money, how we relate to time. And as you may know, a disconnected body lives in urgency. A connected body lives more in a flowing rhythm. When sensuality returns, creativity becomes playful instead of forced. Leadership becomes steady and grounded instead of controlling or, based in ego. And relationships soften because they're no longer performative. And vulnerability is at home. It's invited. It's safe. Did you know that sensuality is literally relational repair? With yourself first, of course, and then with the world at large. And it's true. And this is especially important when we talk about leadership. A sensual leader doesn't dominate a room, she regulates it. She brings people back into their bodies just by how she moves, listens, and pauses. That's power. Quiet, undeniable, and unrushed. I want to make this very real for a moment. Because sensuality isn't something I reach for when life is easy. It's what carries me through change. It's what has carried me through so much change in my life. It's what has allowed me to move through all the beginnings and endings to this point, through starting over, through dating again, through quitting jobs that no longer fit, and beginning careers that asked me to trust myself before they even made sense. Sensuality is what helped me feel enough when I had less money, less certainty, less makeup, less armor. The list can go on and on there. It's the very thing that I return to when I just feel lost and unsure of what's next. And it has never led me astray. It's what allows me to travel solo and internationally and still feel very much rooted in who I am, to walk into old environments without losing myself, and to sit in unfamiliar places and feel at home in my own skin. And I want to say this clearly. None of that came from confidence or having it all figured out. It came from being able to sit with, be, love, and stay with myself. To feel my feet on the ground. To notice my breath, the colors and textures and smells that surround me. to trust my body's timing when my mind wanted answers immediately. Sensuality is the very thing that just allows me to navigate transition in a way that simultaneously magnifies the beauty in the transition and the change and whatever's unfolding, because I'm not focused on, the logic and the different things that, others may focus on. When sensuality is alive, it magnifies beauty, it magnifies love, and it magnifies connection. So it's not about having more. It's truly just about inhabiting yourself fully wherever you are. And as you may begin to notice, this episode is the very beginning of a much larger conversation, because sensuality isn't just one thing. It's a whole way of relating to yourself, the world, and others. And so the episodes that follow are going to be really fun to explore together. And if you're curious, then hang in there with me, okay? Because again, we're going to be talking about sensuality as presence, not performance. Sensuality as sovereignty, sensuality as creative intelligence, sensuality as relational repair, and as leadership. So not as theory, because, well, that's boring, but as actual lived experience. This series isn't about doing more. It's about listening more closely, being present fully, and letting the body lead again. So before we close, I want to offer you just a short little practice. You can do this seated, lying down, or standing wherever you are. So I invite you to just gently place one hand on your chest and one on your lower belly. And without changing anything, just notice your breath. Exactly how it is. The inhale and the exhale. Notice your pace, your rhythm. Then quietly just ask yourself, what does my body need more of right now? Does it need strength or softness? And you don't need an answer in words. A sensation is enough. And I invite you to stay here for 3 breaths. And if it feels supportive, I invite you to silently just say to yourself, I fully and completely love, honor, and accept myself. I don't need to perform to belong in my own body. You can then let your hands drop whenever you're ready. And if this episode stirred something in you, maybe a recognition, an exhale, a little aliveness, trust that. This is just an invitation, and we're only getting started. So in the coming episodes, we'll keep exploring what becomes possible when women return to their bodies with tenderness, clarity, and self-trust. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for opening your heart and listening, and I'll meet you in the next episode of The Mirrored Muse. Thank you so much for trusting me with your time today, for joining this conversation moment, this mirror and movement of remembering. Feel free to keep this conversation going in the comments, and if this episode moved or sparked something within you, I'd be so honored and jazzed if you'd subscribe to the podcast, share it, leave a review, or maybe just invite a friend into the conversation. You can also join our Radiant community on Instagram at The Mirrored Muse, where you'll find more reflections, resources, announcements, and events. So be sure to give us a follow to stay in the know. And until next time, stay wild, stay soft, and never forget, you are the muse.